She only meant to deliver a lunch order and disappear. But when her controlling ex cornered her in a high-rise lobby, Sarah panicked and hid between the legs of a stranger in a suit. That stranger was Ethan Walker, the untouchable CEO of a billion-dollar tech empire. He should have called security. Instead, he looked her in the eye and protected her. That moment, absurd and desperate, became the spark of something neither of them could explain. But what happened next, no one could have predicted. If this story touches you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments, where in the world are you listening from? Your support is what keeps stories like this alive. The revolving doors whispered shut behind Sarah, a soft breeze brushing against her, and the faint echo of the street's chaos fading. For a brief moment, she stood still inside the pristine lobby of Walker Tech, clutching the thermal delivery bag as if it was the only thing holding her to the earth. Raindrops from her soaked jacket pooled onto the white marble beneath her feet, her wet sneakers, leaving faint dark prints with every uneasy step she took. The contrast was jarring, like a punch to the gut. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. A polished receptionist spoke quietly into a headset behind a minimalist counter. The air smelled of sandalwood and success. Sarah, drenched and disheveled in her worn-out hoodie, didn't belong here. "Just drop the order and go," she whispered under her breath, scanning the directory screen. 48th floor, executive wing, Ethan Walker. She didn't know who that was, nor did she care. All she needed to do was make the delivery, get the digital signature, and leave, before he showed up again. But the universe wasn't listening. "Sarah?" She froze. The voice behind her sliced through the quiet like a razor. Slow, confident, familiar in a way that made her entire body stiffen. She turned. There he was. Ryan. Same smug grin, same leather jacket, same eyes that once promised the world and later took her peace. "What a surprise," he said, walking toward her as if they were meeting for coffee. "Didn't think I'd find you in a place like this. Delivering lunch now?" Her heart raced. The fluorescent lights above flickered, or maybe it was just her vision narrowing. She instinctively took a step back, clutching the delivery bag tighter. "Please don't." But Ryan kept moving forward. His tone dropped into that dangerous charm. "I just want to talk. It's been weeks and you won't return my calls. Is this really necessary?" Sarah glanced around. The receptionist was occupied. Security was nowhere in sight. The lobby, so elegant just moments ago, now felt like a trap. "You need to leave," something inside her screamed, but her body wouldn't listen. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw him. A man standing near the elevators. Tall, impeccably dressed in a navy three-piece suit. He was scrolling through emails on his phone, completely unaware of the tension building just feet away. His presence radiated stillness, authority. A man accustomed to controlling every room he walked into. Before her mind could catch up, her body acted. Sarah ran straight toward him, and driven by desperation and instinct, she knelt between his legs and wrapped her arms around his thigh. The man nearly dropped his phone. "Excuse me?" "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Just pretend you know me. Please." He looked down, startled, his eyes scanning her shaking hands, her rain-soaked clothes, the fear etched into her face. Then, behind her, he saw Ryan. Ryan's expression darkened. "What the hell?" The man's voice came low, even, like a switch had been flipped. "Is there a problem here?" Ryan blinked, caught off guard. "This doesn't concern you, man." She's with me," the man interrupted, his words sharp, final. Sarah felt the air shift, the way Ryan hesitated, trying to figure out this stranger, who now stood between him and control. "I suggest you leave," the man added calmly. "Or I'll call security, unless you'd prefer I call the police." Ryan clenched his jaw, his eyes darting between them. "Whatever, this isn't over." He turned and stormed out. The glass doors whispered shut behind him. Silence. Sarah's breath came in short, shaky gasps. She stayed crouched, arms still wrapped around the man's leg. Then, realizing what she had just done, she scrambled to her feet. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," she said quickly, her eyes wide with mortification. I didn't know what else to do." He took a half step back, straightening his suit jacket. His jaw was sharp, his eyes a smoky steel blue that missed nothing. I'd say that was the most unconventional greeting I've ever received. She flushed, brushing damp hair from her face. I panicked. He's my ex. He's been following me, calling non-stop. I thought I lost him hours ago. Clearly you didn't, he said, his voice calm but clipped. Are you safe now? Sarah nodded quickly. I will be. I'm sorry for dragging you into this. I'm just here to deliver a lunch order to a Mr. Ethan Walker. I'll get out of your way. He raised an eyebrow. You're looking at him. She blinked. Wait, you're Ethan Walker? He offered a faint smile. Unless I've been impersonating myself all morning. Her heart thudded. Oh God, she had just literally thrown herself at the feet of the CEO. I'll just leave your lunch at reception, she said, backing away. Thank you again, and sorry again. Hold on. His voice stopped her mid-step. She turned slowly. I could have walked away, he said, hands in his pockets, eyes locked on hers. But I didn't. You ever wonder why? Sarah swallowed hard. Because you're nice? Ethan chuckled. No one's ever called me that, not twice. She tilted her head. Then why? He paused, thoughtful. Because you made me curious, and I don't ignore that. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a sleek silver business card. Simple, minimalist. Just a name, a number, and a title that carried weight. If you're ever tired of running, he said, extending it, call me. I'm hiring a temp assistant, short-term, chaos preferred. She looked at the card as if it might burn her fingers. Why would you offer a job to someone who just hid under your suit? His smile was faint, but real. Because you survived something most people wouldn't understand, and you still had the guts to ask for help. That tells me more than a resume ever could. Sarah took the card, her hands trembling. Her gaze locked with his for a beat longer than was appropriate. There was something in his eyes, not pity, not intrigue, something steadier, like recognition. Thank you, she said softly. As she turned to leave, she felt it, the strange magnetic awareness that she had just stepped into a story far bigger than a lunch delivery. And deep down, even if she didn't admit it yet, she knew. Her life was about to change. Sarah never imagined she'd walk into that building again, let alone so soon. But there she was, standing once more at the glossy reception desk of Walker Tech, her backpack slung over one shoulder and her nerves on fire. It had only been 2 days since the bizarre encounter. 2 days since, in a state of panic, she had dropped to the marble floor and hidden between the legs of a man she didn't know. A stranger who just happened to be Ethan Walker, the CEO of the very company she was now nervously entering. And somehow, instead of being escorted out or reported, she'd left with his business card. She had stared at that card a dozen times since then. Silver, sleek, no nonsense. The kind of card that didn't belong in the hands of someone like her, someone who juggled side gigs to keep the electricity on and had learned to survive by expecting nothing. But still, she had called. Her fingers had trembled as she dialed the number. When the HR assistant answered and cheerfully scheduled an informal interview, Sarah thought it might be a prank. But the time and date arrived, and no one called to cancel. So now, here she stood, wearing the only semi-professional blouse she owned, slightly wrinkled from its time buried in the back of her closet. She'd tied her curls into a neat bun and dabbed on just enough makeup to feel presentable, but not enough to look like she was trying too hard. Still, she felt like an imposter walking through a dream that wasn't hers. "Sarah Bennett?" the receptionist said with a friendly smile. "You can go up. Mr. Walker is expecting you on the 48th floor." She swallowed hard. "Thanks." The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, revealing a sleek interior of golden mirrors and soft lighting. Alone in the mirrored capsule, Sarah adjusted her backpack strap and exhaled slowly as the elevator climbed. She wasn't sure what she expected when the doors slid open, but it definitely wasn't the near silence of a minimalist executive suite. Soft jazz played from speakers she couldn't see. Plush armchairs lined the hallway. Frosted glass walls revealed glimpses of modern conference rooms and elegant workspaces. A woman appeared from the corner, tall, elegant, clipboard in hand, lips pursed in permanent disapproval. Sarah Bennett? Yes, she replied. I'm Sophie, Mr. Walker's operations chief. Follow me. The hallway was so quiet she could hear the subtle click of Sophie's heels. Sarah tried not to fidget, but her fingers kept brushing against the zipper of her bag like a nervous tick. Sophie opened a frosted door and stepped aside. He'll be with you shortly. Sarah walked in slowly. The office was unlike anything she'd seen before, more like a luxury suite than a corporate room. A wall of windows displayed the New York skyline in its full glory. Modern art hung on the walls, and a dark espresso machine hummed softly in the corner. Books lined one entire wall. Real books, not decorative ones. She barely had time to take it in before she heard the door click behind her. "Glad you came," said a familiar voice. Sarah turned, and there he was. Ethan Walker, no suit jacket this time, just a crisp white shirt rolled up to the elbows. Somehow he looked even more intimidating like that. Relaxed, in control. "Hi," she said quickly. "Thanks again for what you did the other day." He waved off her words, walking toward the desk. "That was nothing. You looked like someone who needed backup. I usually handle things myself." "I noticed." He smirked. "But even the most capable people deserve help sometimes." She shifted uncomfortably. "So the job, is this really for real? I don't have a degree in tech or business. My resume includes waitressing, delivery work, and I think I once sold air purifiers door to door." Ethan leaned against the edge of his desk, folding his arms. "What I need right now isn't a resume. I need someone who can handle pressure, think fast, and not crumble when things get weird. You've already proven all three." Sarah stared at him. "You want me to be your assistant?" "Temporarily. My last one quit mid-presentation. Something about stress and not being allowed to vape indoors." She couldn't help the small laugh that escaped. "Sounds intense. This company's been under pressure. We're launching a new product in 6 weeks. It's going to be big, and the board's breathing down my neck. I need someone who can help coordinate, communicate with vendors, keep schedules tight, someone who doesn't get intimidated easily." Sarah hesitated. "And if I mess up?" He studied her. "Then you mess up, but you won't." She looked away. "I'm not exactly what people expect in a place like this." "Exactly why I want you here." That caught her off guard. She looked at him again, her voice softer. "Why are you really offering me this?" Ethan pushed off the desk, walking closer. His tone dropped. "Because when I saw you in the lobby, scared but still fighting, I saw someone I hadn't seen in a long time. Someone with fire. And I realized I missed that kind of fire around here." Sarah blinked. No one had said something like that to her in years, if ever. "I need an answer today," he said. "You start tomorrow if you say yes." Sarah looked at the view behind him, then at the chair in front of the desk, and then back at the man who had somehow unraveled her fear without even trying. And then, despite every doubt, every voice in her head saying she wasn't enough, she said the one word she didn't expect to say, "Okay." But just as Ethan extended his hand to shake on it, the door opened again, and Sophie reappeared. She didn't smile. "The board meeting's been moved up 20 minutes. Ethan's demeanor shifted instantly. "Understood." He turned back to Sarah. "Welcome to chaos." She laughed, unsure if he was joking. Then Sophie added, her eyes fixed on Sarah, "Should I prepare an onboarding pass for your assistant?" The way she said it made Sarah's stomach twist slightly, like she already didn't approve, like she had seen 100 girls like Sarah come and go. But Sarah didn't look away. Instead, she lifted her chin and nodded. "Yes," Ethan said, "she'll be riding up with me." And just like that, before Sarah could even breathe, she was walking through glass hallways alongside the most intimidating man she'd ever met, about to step into a boardroom full of billionaires with a job title she hadn't even memorized yet. And somehow deep in her chest something stirred, something reckless and hopeful. What on earth had she just agreed to? Sarah's first official day at Walker Tech started with 2 spilled coffees, 1 paper jam, and a fire drill she didn't realize was a drill until she was halfway down the stairwell, holding someone's potted plant in her arms. She was chaos in a blouse, but oddly, she wasn't completely alone in it. Ethan hadn't given her a formal orientation, just a quick nod that morning, followed by a cryptic, "You'll figure it out." And she had, more or less. With the help of a very patient IT guy named Marcus and 3 YouTube tutorials, Sarah had set up her workstation. She was placed just outside Ethan's office in the executive wing, a sleek space that felt like a different galaxy compared to the cramped delivery kitchens she was used to. But the real galaxy, the one with cold stars and sharp edges, revolved around Sophie. Sarah had felt her icy gaze the moment she stepped onto the 48th floor again. Sophie didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Every word she spoke felt like a critique, even when she was asking someone to pass the stapler, and she had made it crystal clear that Sarah was not to be coddled. "Keep personal conversations minimal," Sophie had said on the first morning. "This isn't a coffee house." Sarah had blinked. "I wasn't trying to chat, just asking whether, and no touching anyone's desk without explicit permission," Sophie continued, adjusting her perfect bun. "This team values precision." Sarah had nodded, biting her tongue. Precision. Right. Still, even in the friction, Sarah found strange satisfaction. She was learning. Every document she filed, every vendor call she handled, every set of notes she typed with trembling fingers, it all built something. She could feel herself evolving from the girl who crouched in panic to the woman who sat at the nerve center of a billion-dollar company. And then there was Ethan. He didn't hover. He didn't micromanage. He observed. Sometimes Sarah would look up from her desk and find him leaning against the glass, arms crossed, his eyes unreadable. She never knew if he was silently judging or quietly approving. Once, after she accidentally sent a company-wide email announcing the arrival of fresh bagels, she waited for the inevitable reprimand. But all Ethan did was poke his head out of his office, raise a brow and say, "Hope you saved me one." That night, she laughed for 10 minutes straight in her apartment, a half-eaten grilled cheese on her lap. But not everything was easy. There were moments she wanted to give up, like when she mixed up 2 contracts and nearly sent the wrong version to the investors, or when Sophie accidentally left her out of an important morning briefing and then blamed Sarah for missing it. Still, every time she faltered, Sarah reminded herself, "You don't get to break this time. You've broken enough." Ethan, surprisingly, seemed to notice. Late one evening, as the office emptied out and Sarah was typing up notes under the warm hum of desk lights, Ethan approached her desk quietly. "You stayed late," he said. She didn't look up. "I needed to fix something I messed up earlier. I saw the corrected file. It was well done." She finally looked at him, surprised. "You saw it?" "I see more than you think," he replied, his tone unreadable. She hesitated. "Do you think I'm out of place here?" He studied her, hands in his pockets. "Do you think you are?" Sarah exhaled. "Sometimes. This world, it's not built for people like me." "What kind of people are like you? People who didn't finish college, who've waited tables and delivered food to survive. People who don't know the difference between a KPI and an NDA." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's not what defines someone's worth. Hunger teaches more than comfort ever could." That silenced her. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time saw not just the CEO but the man, the way his shirt sleeves were rolled unevenly, the shadow under his eyes that even money couldn't hide, the way he leaned on the glass wall sometimes as if he was holding up more than just a company. "You know," she said softly, "for someone so intimidating, you're surprisingly human." He smiled faintly. "Don't tell anyone." Their eyes met, and the air shifted. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was charged. There was no flirting, no dramatic music swelling. Just something unspoken. A current that neither of them fully understood yet. Moments like that became more frequent. They shared glances in meetings, brief comments passed in elevators. He'd leave her notes with cryptic doodles, like a coffee mug with lightning bolts when she pulled off a last-minute schedule switch, or a tiny tornado when she tripped over a projector cord during a pitch. Sarah began to breathe differently at work. Not easier, but more deliberately. She was no longer just surviving. She was becoming. One afternoon, after a brutal call with a supplier that left her head spinning, Sarah stepped into the empty break room for a breather. She stood at the window, letting the city blur beneath her. She didn't notice Ethan until he spoke behind her. "You handled that call better than I would have." She turned, startled. You heard that? I hear everything on this floor. Should I be worried? He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Only if you stop being honest. That's your edge. She blinked. My edge? Everyone here is polished, strategic. You say what you mean. People underestimate that. Until they don't. Sarah nodded slowly. I think I'm just scared I'll screw it all up. He tilted his head. Good. People who are afraid of failing tend to work harder not to. Their eyes locked again, longer this time. And just as Sarah was about to say something she hadn't yet put into words, Sophie walked in, her heels clicking against the tile like thunder. There's an issue with the investor slides, she said, eyeing them both. I assume someone will fix it? Ethan didn't flinch. Already handled. Sophie raised an eyebrow and walked out. Sarah stared at the door, then at Ethan. Does she hate me, or is that just her resting mood? Ethan smirked. Little of both. They both laughed, quietly but fully. That night Sarah stayed late again, but this time when Ethan walked past her desk with his coat slung over his shoulder, he paused. Don't let her get to you, he said. I'm not, Sarah replied. Not anymore. He nodded, and for a second she thought he might say something else, something heavier, but he didn't. Instead, he turned and walked toward the elevator. Sarah, left alone in the hum of the office lights, felt something new blooming in the space he'd just left behind. Something she couldn't yet name, but could no longer ignore. The day of the investor meeting arrived cloaked in tension. The entire 48th floor buzzed with urgency, papers shuffling, printers humming, voices clipped and purposeful. Even the scent of fresh espresso in the hallway couldn't mask the undercurrent of pressure pulsing through the office. Sarah had barely slept. She'd spent the previous night triple-checking spreadsheets, reviewing slide decks and memorizing the names and roles of the 5 key investors who'd be seated in the front row. She wasn't presenting, but Ethan had made it clear she'd be in the room, not as an assistant but as part of the team. Just observe, he'd said that morning, adjusting his cufflinks without looking at her. No pressure, unless the projector catches fire. She'd laughed nervously. Is that a thing that's happened here before? No, he replied dryly, but I like to keep my expectations open. By noon, the boardroom had transformed into a stage, minimalist, elegant, with glass pitchers of water glinting in the light and branded folders neatly placed at every seat. The projector hummed softly as it cast the company's sleek logo onto the screen. Sarah stood off to the side, clutching her notepad. Her stomach churned. Ethan entered last, composed as always, his presence snapping the room to silence. With a slight nod, he greeted the investors. Sophie took her position by the control tablet at the wall, ready to manage the slides. Everything was rehearsed. Everything was timed, until it wasn't. 10 minutes into the pitch, just as Ethan was describing the tech integration plans for the company's new AI product, Sarah noticed something odd. Sophie's finger hovered over the tablet. A subtle frown appeared on her lips, then a flicker. The screen behind Ethan stuttered. For a second, the slide blinked away and was replaced by a dark background with unfamiliar text and a small animation spinning in the corner. Ethan paused mid-sentence. Sophie muttered something and tapped again. But before she could regain control, the screen shifted, displaying a prototype animation that hadn't been shown to anyone yet. A raw internal test file with incomplete UX visuals, rough voiceover audio, and developer notes still plastered across the edges. The room froze. One of the investors leaned forward. "What's this?" he asked. Sophie paled. Ethan turned slightly to glance at the screen, his jaw tight. Sarah stepped forward, heart racing. "That's one of the test phases," she said quietly. "A behind-the-scenes view of the interface development. It wasn't intended for this presentation." But the animation continued playing. The AI assistant's voice, still in its raw form, guided the user through simulated choices. Though unpolished, it showed something vital, potential. Another investor turned to Ethan. "This wasn't part of the deck, but it's impressive, unfiltered, authentic." Ethan glanced at Sarah, then at Sophie. "It's not finished," he said evenly. "Exactly," the same investor replied, "which means we're seeing your process, your ambition. You're not just selling a product, you're evolving it. That's rare. Sarah's pulse thudded in her ears. The moment that had begun as a technical failure was morphing into something else, something almost refreshing. As the animation ended, Ethan stepped forward, seamless in his transition. "While that file was not scheduled," he said calmly, "it gives you a glimpse into our design evolution. We value transparency. What you just saw is part of how we move. Fast, real, and forward." The room nodded in approval, and just like that the meeting continued. When it ended, handshakes were exchanged. Business cards slid across the table. Several investors offered direct praise for the surprise peek behind the curtain. The tension dissipated, replaced by a strange electricity, but as the room emptied, Sophie turned sharply to Sarah. "That file wasn't on the list. How did it even get into the folder?" "I don't know," Sarah said honestly. "I didn't touch the file queue." Sophie's gaze was sharp, but her tone was controlled. "I suggest you double-check your access permissions next time." "I didn't upload it," Sarah insisted. "Noted," Sophie said flatly, then walked away. Sarah stood there, shoulders tense, replaying every click she'd made that morning. "That wasn't your fault," Ethan said behind her. She turned. "You're sure?" "I reviewed the server logs." Sophie mislabeled the folders. "You just happened to be the nearest explanation." Sarah exhaled, relief flooding her chest. "Thank you for saying that. I thought I was losing my mind." Ethan gave her a faint smile. "You handled it well. That quick thinking helped flip the situation. I panicked. You spoke up." Sarah looked down. "It wasn't even my meeting. I should have just stayed quiet. But you didn't." And that made the difference. Their eyes locked, and for a second, the boardroom was no longer filled with tension. It was filled with something else. A current. A recognition. "I don't think Sophie likes me very much," she said softly. "She doesn't like anyone very much," Ethan replied, "but she respects results. Today, you delivered one." A faint smile curved Sarah's lips. As she gathered her notes, she noticed Ethan lingered for a moment longer than necessary. She expected him to return to his office, but instead, he walked beside her down the corridor. "I wasn't going to say this in front of the team," he began, his voice low. "But what you did today, how you handled that disruption, I don't see that kind of presence often." Sarah blinked. "Presence?" "Confidence under pressure. Honesty without apology. You've got more than you think." She felt the heat rise to her cheeks. "That's not how I feel most days." "Good," Ethan said. "If you ever start thinking you've figured everything out, let me know. I'll fire you." Sarah laughed, the sound echoing lightly off the glass walls. They reached the elevator. He pressed the button. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan added, almost like an afterthought, "You made today better." Sarah turned her head toward him, studying his profile. There was something in the way he said it, not just professional acknowledgement, but something quieter, more personal. The elevator dinged. He stepped inside first, then held the door. She hesitated, then stepped in. And as the doors slid shut, she felt something stir in the quiet space between them, something unspoken, undeniable. But neither of them said a word. When Ethan first mentioned the dinner, Sarah thought he was joking. "Wait. Your family," she repeated, blinking. "Yes. Like parents, siblings." "Just my parents," he said. "Private dinner. Casual." "Casual?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. "Coming from you, that probably means a silent table and 3 forks." He smiled faintly. "Only 2 forks." Still, Sarah hesitated. She'd imagined a lot of scenarios after taking the job, messing up files, spilling coffee on an investor, maybe even getting fired, but not dinner with her boss's family, and definitely not as his guest. "It's not a date," Ethan had clarified. "They think I spend too much time working. I need someone to balance the mood. You're good at that." So now, standing in front of a grand townhouse in the Upper East Side, Sarah wasn't so sure about the casual part. She wore a simple dark green dress, one she'd borrowed from her roommate and paired with black flats. Her hair was pinned loosely, and her palms were slick with nerves. She wasn't even dating Ethan, and yet this felt like crossing an invisible line. The door opened before she could knock. "You must be Sarah," said a man in his late 60s, tall, silver-haired, with the same quiet intensity as Ethan, but with warmer eyes. "I'm Robert Walker, Ethan's father." Sarah extended her hand. "It's really nice to meet you, sir." He shook it firmly. "Any woman who can survive working with my son deserves a proper meal." Behind him, a woman appeared, immaculate, poised, with ice-blonde hair and a pearl necklace that probably cost more than Sarah's entire apartment. She didn't smile. "Elaine," she said, offering a handshake that felt like a formality. "Welcome." "Thank you," Sarah replied, trying not to let the woman's gaze rattle her. Ethan appeared a moment later, loosening his tie. "You're early." "You said 6, Sarah replied, "and I meant 6:15. She rolled her eyes, which made Robert chuckle softly. They moved into the dining room, a beautiful space filled with understated luxury, dim lighting, fresh flowers, crystal glasses. The kind of place where you instinctively straightened your posture and thought twice before using the wrong fork. Dinner began with wine. Sarah declined and asked for water instead, a choice that made Elaine's eyebrows twitch ever so slightly. But Robert leaned in, asking about her background. When Sarah explained she'd worked multiple jobs and had taken time off school to care for her mother, he didn't flinch. He listened. "And what brought you to Walker Tech?" he asked. Sarah paused. "Honestly, I ran in off the street to hide from my ex-boyfriend, and your son offered me a job." Robert blinked, then laughed. A full, delighted sound that made Ethan glance up from his plate, surprised. Elaine, however, pursed her lips. "That sounds unconventional." "It was," Sarah admitted. "But so is your son." That earned her the ghost of a smile from Elaine, and something more from Ethan. A brief, approving glance across the table. The rest of the evening unfolded slowly, like a tight knot loosening. Sarah found herself laughing at Robert's dry wit, answering Ethan's quiet nudges with ease, and even holding her own when Elaine asked about ethics in corporate culture. "I may not have a formal education in business," Sarah said, "but I've learned a lot about people, especially the ones who pretend not to see others struggling." Elaine's gaze lingered on her, but this time it wasn't sharp. It was curious, maybe even contemplative. After dessert, Robert offered Sarah a tour of his book collection, rows of antique editions and first prints. She followed him while Ethan stayed back to speak with Elaine. "Did you know," Robert said softly, "that Ethan hasn't brought anyone to dinner in nearly 5 years?" Sarah froze. "I didn't realize this was significant." "He says it's not," Robert said, smiling to himself. "But I know my son. He doesn't invite people unless they matter." She didn't know how to respond to that. When they returned to the living room, Ethan was already waiting by the door, coat in hand. The night air outside was crisp, the street lit by soft lamplight. "I'll walk you to the subway," he said. Sarah nodded, and after polite goodbyes, they stepped out into the quiet evening. They walked side by side in silence for a while. The city felt different at that hour, slower, gentler, like it was catching its breath. "That went better than expected," Ethan said finally. "Your dad's great," she replied. "Your mom is intimidating." "She intimidates everyone, it's her hobby." Sarah glanced at him. "Why did you really invite me?" He looked straight ahead. "Because you don't pretend, and I needed that tonight." She didn't speak, neither did he. But as they reached the subway steps, Ethan stopped walking. "Robert wasn't wrong, you know," he said. "About what?" "I don't bring people home." Sarah swallowed. "I'm not sure what this is, Ethan." "Neither am I," he said honestly. "But it's something." For a second it felt like he might say more, like he might reach for her, close the gap, make something tangible out of all the tension that lived in their silences. But he didn't. Instead, he nodded. "I'll see you tomorrow." And just like that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the streetlight, leaving Sarah alone on the steps, her heart racing with a question she couldn't yet name. The day had started with storms, thunder rolling through the city before dawn, heavy clouds pressing low over the skyline like a warning. Sarah arrived at Walker Tech drenched despite her umbrella, her curls rebelling against any attempt at order. The lobby lights flickered once, then again. By mid-afternoon the rain had slowed, but the electricity inside the building remained tense. Systems blinked, meetings shifted. Even Sophie looked uneasy, glancing up every time the lights dimmed. "Backup generators are stable," someone from IT announced. "But if anything flickers again, we're pausing operations." Sarah was on her way to deliver updated schedules to Ethan when she noticed the elevator light struggling to stay lit. She hesitated, but only for a second. Ethan stepped in just as the doors began to close. He held them open. "Coming?" She nodded and joined him. They rode in silence. The soft hum of the elevator was strangely comforting, until it wasn't. Somewhere between the 26th and 27th floor, the lights dimmed. Then everything stopped. The elevator jolted, not violently, but enough to send Sarah's hand flying to the wall for balance. The hum vanished. So did the lights. Only the soft red glow of emergency lighting remained. "Oh no," she whispered. Ethan pressed the intercom. Nothing. Then the emergency call button. Still nothing. "Looks like we're stuck," he said calmly. Sarah took a breath, willing her pulse to slow. "How long do these things usually take?" "Depends. Could be 10 minutes, could be 40. She leaned her head back against the mirrored wall and exhaled. Perfect. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was heavy, filled with words neither had said in the past few weeks. Eventually, Ethan broke it. "You don't like small spaces." "I don't like being still," she replied. "Feels unsafe." He glanced at her. "Because you can't escape." She nodded, surprised by his accuracy. "What about you?" she asked. "You don't seem rattled." "I'm not. I like stillness." "Of course you do." He chuckled, folding his arms. "Why does that not surprise you?" "Because you're the kind of person who's always in control. I bet you meditate too." "I do." "Of course you do," she said again, smiling in spite of herself. A beat passed. Then Ethan's voice shifted, softer. "You know, I wasn't always like that." She turned to him. "No." He shook his head. "Control became a habit, a defense. After my brother died, I started managing everything around me. My time, my space, my emotions. It gave me structure." Sarah blinked. "I didn't know you had a brother." "I don't anymore," he said, his voice steady but distant. "He was younger, impulsive, bright. Died in a car crash when I was 21. I never really talked about it." She didn't interrupt. "I felt responsible," he continued. "Even though I wasn't there, even though I couldn't have stopped it. That's the thing about grief. It makes you believe you were supposed to carry a weight you never touched." Sarah stepped closer. "I know what that feels like." He looked at her. "You do?" She nodded. "My mum got sick when I was in my last year of high school. I got accepted to a program abroad, full scholarship. But I stayed, worked, took care of her. People praised me for being selfless, but I hated them for saying that. It didn't feel noble, it just felt necessary. Like if I left, I'd be abandoning something only I could fix." Their eyes locked, pain mirrored in both. The elevator remained still. "I read that story," Ethan said quietly. "The scholarship. I found it when I looked you up." Her breath caught. "You looked me up?" He nodded. "Before I offered you the job. I wanted to know who you were. Why didn't you say anything?" "I didn't want you to think it changed anything. Or that I hired you out of pity." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "But now I feel like it does." He stepped forward just slightly. "Then let me be clear. I didn't hire you out of pity, Sarah. I hired you because you made me feel something when I hadn't in years." She blinked. "What?" "In the lobby that day. You were terrified, but you didn't hide. You asked for help, boldly. Then you stood back up and apologized to me for needing it. And then you laughed. Right there in the middle of marble and glass and judgment." Sarah's chest tightened. "I didn't know what else to do." "Exactly. And that's what I've needed around me for a long time. Not another polished resume, not another perfectly trained assistant. I needed you." Her breath faltered. The air between them shifted, thickened. The elevator was silent but alive with something deeper than noise, something close to longing. "Ethan," she whispered, unsure what else to say. He reached out slowly, brushing a curl from her cheek. The light flickered, then buzzed, and the elevator jolted again. Sarah gasped, stepping back just as the system powered back to life. The control panel lit up. The floor numbers resumed climbing. Neither of them spoke. By the time the doors slid open at the 48th floor, the space between them was filled with everything unsaid. Ethan stepped out first, then turned. "Take the afternoon off," he said. "Why?" "Because I need time," he replied. "To think." She nodded. "Me too." The doors closed between them, and Sarah leaned back against the mirrored wall, heart racing, wondering if the next time they were trapped alone, they'd still stop themselves from crossing that line. The silence between them after the elevator incident wasn't cold, it was loud. Not the kind of silence that grows from awkwardness, but the kind that hums just beneath the surface, like static before a storm. Ethan had pulled back. Sarah had retreated, and neither of them knew exactly why. She returned to work the next day, but the air felt different. Their usual rhythm, glances, half smiles, sarcastic remarks, was offbeat. He was polite, professional, even distant. And Sarah? She was confused, frustrated. Her instincts were yelling that something had changed. She just didn't know what. That Friday, as the sun slipped behind the skyline and the office began to empty, Sarah stayed behind, organizing files for an upcoming product review. She was halfway through updating vendor contracts when her screen pinged with a new notification. A shared link. Internal. Archived press. Bennett. Sarah. She froze. The file had been opened by Ethan's private account. Her heart began to race. She clicked the link and found herself staring at something she hadn't seen in years, a local newspaper article, yellowed in tone even through the screen. Headline: Top student declines international scholarship to care for ailing mother. Below it a photo. Younger, softer, her eyes full of promise she hadn't yet had time to lose. The article spoke kindly of her sacrifice, her GPA, her community volunteer hours, a quote from a teacher calling her a once-in-a-generation mind. She hadn't shared that article with anyone at Walker Tech, not Ethan, not HR, no one. Her chest tightened. She left her desk without thinking, the hallway blurring past her. She found him in his office, the city lights casting long shadows across his floor. "You looked me up," she said, standing in the doorway. Ethan looked up slowly. "Yes." "Before you hired me?" "Yes." "And you didn't think to mention that?" He stood, buttoning his jacket calmly. "I didn't think it was relevant to the job." Her voice sharpened. "You didn't think it was relevant that you hired me knowing more about me than I ever told you." "I wanted to understand who you were," he said. "So you walked into my life literally and flipped everything. I needed context. So you dug through my past?" "I didn't dig. It's public. That's not the point." Ethan's jaw clenched. "Then what is the point, Sarah?" She stepped in, trembling with anger she didn't fully understand yet. "You say you see me, you say I'm different, but you never asked me who I am. You read a file and filled in the rest. I've watched you work. I've listened to you in meetings. I see how you show up. That article only confirmed what I already suspected. You're not just capable, you're exceptional." She laughed bitterly. "Exceptional? You think I'm exceptional because I gave up a dream? That I'm some kind of tragic inspiration?" "No," he said quickly. "I think you're exceptional because despite everything you still show up and fight." Sarah's voice dropped. "But you didn't trust me to tell you that myself." The air between them was razor thin. "I didn't want you to feel like you owed me anything," Ethan said softly. "Or like this job was charity." She stepped back. "It doesn't feel like charity. It feels like a test I didn't know I was taking." He was quiet. Then, carefully, he said, "You've always been more honest with me than anyone else here, even when it's messy. I admire that. And yet you kept this from me." He exhaled slowly. "I made a mistake." She nodded once. "Yeah, you did." She turned to leave, but he called after her. "Sarah." She paused, hand on the glass door. "I didn't hire you because of your past," he said. "I hired you because of your presence." Her throat tightened. "Then you should have let me be present without digging up who I used to be." The door clicked shut behind her. She walked past the elevator, past the break room, past the place where she'd once hidden between his legs in fear. And she kept walking. The next morning, her keycard didn't beep at the scanner. She'd left it on his desk, along with a short note. "Thank you for seeing potential in me, but I need to be seen for who I am now, not who I was in a headline." No signature. No goodbye. And for the first time in weeks, Ethan sat in his office alone, completely still, staring at an empty desk just outside his door, wondering if the silence left behind was his own fault. The first day without Sarah felt colder than any storm. It wasn't just her absence, it was the way her absence rearranged everything else. Ethan arrived at the office at his usual time, his steps measured, coat immaculate, tie perfectly knotted. But something about the silence outside his door hit different. It echoed. Her desk was still there, untouched. A closed laptop, a chair pushed in too neatly, no scribbled sticky notes on the corner of the monitor, no scattered papers marked with doodles and caffeine stains, no laugh leaking quietly through the glass when someone tripped in the hallway. Just stillness. Sophie passed by once that morning, glanced at the desk and said nothing. No one did. Ethan didn't replace her, not immediately. He told HR he was handling his own scheduling for now, though it was a lie. He simply left most tasks undone. The gaps in his calendar began to multiply, but he didn't mind. It gave him space to sit with what had happened. He reread her note too many times. "Thank you for seeing potential in me, but I need to be seen for who I am now, not who I was in a headline." She hadn't even signed it. No name, no flourish, just those words, and then silence. And it hurt. Not because she was wrong, but because she was right. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Sarah was back in motion, but not in the same way. The temp agency had placed her at a logistics company uptown. She was answering phones, managing a clunky spreadsheet system that hadn't been updated since 2009, and sharing a desk with a woman who ate sardines at 10 a.m. every day. The office was grey, the windows were tinted, the coffee was instant and bitter, but it wasn't just the place that felt empty. It was her. She told herself she had done the right thing, that leaving had been an act of self-respect, that being seen as a person, not a headline, mattered more than any promotion or salary, and maybe it did. But still, every time her phone buzzed with a new task, her fingers hesitated. She missed the chaos, the real chaos, the kind that came with innovation and urgency and being trusted to step into the storm. She missed the scribbled notes Ethan used to leave on her desk. She missed the way he'd lean against the doorframe after long meetings, saying things like, "Well, that was a circus," as if only she would understand. She missed him, not as her boss, not even as the man who once made her heart flutter in an elevator, but as someone who saw her fire and didn't ask her to dim it. At night, she found herself replaying memories in small, stolen fragments. The way he had looked at her across the dinner table with his family, the way his voice softened when he talked about his brother, the way his hand had reached out for hers before the elevator lights came back on. She wondered if he was thinking about her too. Ethan, for his part, found himself doing things he didn't normally do, staring out windows longer than necessary, skipping lunch, watching the elevator doors open and close like something might step out of them. Something, or someone. He reviewed the security footage once, just to see her leaving that last day, the moment she placed the keycard and note on his desk, the way she looked back once, briefly, as if hoping he'd stop her. But he hadn't. And now, that silence followed him like a shadow. The board noticed his shift in focus. "You've been distracted," one member said during a strategy meeting. "I'm focused on the big picture," Ethan replied curtly. But the truth was, the big picture felt blurrier without her voice in the room. Marcus from IT casually asked one afternoon, "Whatever happened to Sarah? She was cool." Ethan didn't answer. Sarah's roommate noticed it too. "You're not okay," she said one night over leftover pasta. "I'm fine," Sarah replied. "No, you're functioning." "That's not the same," Sarah exhaled. "It's just, I thought leaving would feel like freedom, but instead I feel like I stepped out of something important, and now I don't know if it was too early or too late." A week passed, then 2, then nearly 3, And on a particularly grey Monday morning, Sarah walked past a bookstore downtown and paused in front of the window. There, in the display, was a tech magazine. On the cover, Ethan Walker. She picked it up with trembling hands. The headline read, "Walker Tech CEO redefines leadership culture, leaning into transparency." She flipped through the article quickly. He spoke about rebuilding trust, about learning to listen more than control, about owning mistakes. One quote stood out, "Sometimes the most important voice in the room isn't the loudest. It's the one that told the truth before you were ready to hear it." Sarah closed the magazine and stared out at the street. The weight in her chest shifted. She didn't know what it meant, but she knew it wasn't over, not yet. It had been 24 days since Sarah left Walker Tech. 24 sunrises, 24 nights with questions circling her thoughts like restless birds. And still, no word from Ethan, no messages, no emails, nothing. She had tried to move on. She kept showing up at the temp job, answered phones, filed invoices, laughed at things that weren't funny. She even went on one date with a barista who liked obscure poetry and wore corduroy in summer. But her mind kept drifting back to a different voice, a different silence, a different kind of tension. Then, on a quiet Saturday afternoon, the sky soft with autumn light, Sarah took a long walk through Central Park. She didn't plan to. Her feet just led her there, as if retracing something her heart hadn't finished. She walked until the path opened to a familiar bench, one she used to pass by on her way to Walker Tech, just before she started taking the subway again. And there, seated beneath the sway of golden leaves, was Ethan. She stopped. He looked different. A little more tired, a little less armored. His sleeves were rolled up. His phone was nowhere in sight. He didn't see her at first, but then he did. Their eyes met. And for a moment, the noise of the park, the children playing nearby, the distant bark of a dog, the wheels of a stroller on gravel, faded into a hush. Sarah took a breath and walked over. "Is this seat taken?" she asked. Ethan didn't smile, but something in his expression softened. "It's been waiting for you." She sat. A pause. Then he said, "I've been coming here every Saturday." "Why?" "Because you walk here sometimes." She glanced at him, surprised. "So you were hoping I'd just appear?" "No," he said. "I was hoping I'd find the courage to reach out. And if I couldn't, maybe the universe would do it for me." Sarah looked away, toward the lake in the distance. Ducks glided over the surface, calm and indifferent. "I read the article," she said finally. "The one in the magazine. I figured you might." That quote, about the quiet voice, was that about me? He nodded once. "It was." She exhaled. "I didn't leave to punish you, Ethan. I left because I was starting to disappear. I know. I didn't want to be someone frozen in a file. I wanted to be here, now, with everything messy and unfinished." He turned toward her. "You're not a file to me. You never were. But I was afraid that if I admitted how much you mattered, I'd lose control, and that's something I've spent years avoiding." She studied his face. "And now?" "Now I know control doesn't protect you from loss. It only keeps you from connection." Her chest tightened. He continued, voice lower. "I didn't come here today to convince you to come back to the company, or even to me. I came because I owed you honesty, and because I missed you, in ways I don't know how to name." Sarah blinked back, the sting in her eyes. "I missed you too," she whispered. "Not the job, not the title. Just you." He looked down at his hands. "I hurt you. I hate that I did." She nodded. "But I also grew from it. So maybe it wasn't all bad." Ethan looked at her, and for the first time in weeks his eyes held something real, unguarded. "I've changed things," he said, "at the company. The way we onboard, the way we talk about leadership, your voice. It started something." She smiled faintly. "Good. I want to ask you something," he added, more cautious now. Sarah raised a brow. "You're not about to propose another job, are you?" "No," he chuckled. "I was going to ask if you'd like to walk with me." She looked at him, not as her former boss, not as the man who once kept his feelings folded into silence, but as someone who was trying, someone who had cracked open a little because of her. "Okay," she said. They stood. He offered her his arm, not out of formality, but like an invitation to rebuild something one step at a time. They began walking through the park, side by side, not speaking for a while. The leaves rustled above them. The city breathed around them. And slowly the space between them closed, not with a kiss, not with a confession, but with quiet presence, with a beginning, a different kind. The invitation arrived in an ivory envelope with her name handwritten in dark ink. Sarah turned it over twice before opening it. The texture of the paper was smooth, expensive. Inside, a formal card bore the golden emblem of Walker Tech's annual gala. A post-it was stuck to it, written in Ethan's familiar hand. Come as my guest, not as my assistant. No title, no pressure, just a line that pulsed like a question. She held the invitation in her hands for a long time before she replied with a simple, "I'll be there." Now, standing in front of a mirror in a dress she never thought she'd wear, Sarah hardly recognized herself. The gown was a deep navy, fitted at the waist and flowing to the floor, borrowed from a friend with a taste for elegance. Her curls were pinned softly at the sides, and a thin silver necklace rested just above her collarbone. As she stepped into the hired car and watched the city lights blur past the window, Sarah tried to slow her breathing. This wasn't about work. This wasn't about fixing anything. It was something else entirely. By the time she arrived at the ballroom, the night was already alive with music and murmured conversation. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Waiters moved like clockwork between guests in tuxedos and floor-length gowns. Cameras flashed, laughter echoed, and then Ethan. He was standing near the entrance, dressed in a black tuxedo, bow tie slightly loosened, a glass of something untouched in his hand. But the moment he saw her, everything else in the room seemed to pause. He walked toward her with quiet purpose, his eyes never leaving hers. "You came," he said. "You invited me," she replied, lips curving. "You look—" He hesitated, then found the words. "Like everyone else should leave the room," she laughed, brushing off the compliment. "You clean up all right, too." They stood in silence for a beat too long, the energy between them undeniable. Then Ethan offered his arm. "Shall we?" The night unfolded in golden shadow. He introduced her not as an employee, not even as a consultant, but simply as Sarah. People looked. Whispers passed, a few eyebrows raised. But Ethan didn't flinch, and Sarah didn't shrink. She danced with him once, slowly, carefully, as a string quartet filled the room. His hand rested at the small of her back, and her fingers curled loosely into his. "Everyone's watching," she whispered. "Let them." Their steps matched without effort. They weren't rehearsed, but natural, like something familiar had returned to them. Between dances and toasts, Sarah caught glances from Sophie. Cool, calculating, but not cruel. Later, while Sarah was at the edge of the ballroom sipping sparkling water, one of the junior executives approached her. "You're the Sarah, right?" he asked. She turned. "The Sarah. The one who turned a prototype glitch into a deal closer. Word gets around." She smiled politely. It wasn't a glitch. It was just an honest mistake. "Well, it paid off," he said. "You've made an impression. Just figured you should know." As he walked away, Ethan appeared at her side. "You okay?" "I think so," she said. "This is a lot." He nodded. "Want some air?" They stepped onto the balcony, where the hum of the party softened behind glass doors. The night was cool. The city glittered below. "You were right," she said softly. "About what?" "Sometimes presence matters more than perfection." He leaned on the railing beside her. "You made this night better, just like you made the company better." She glanced at him. "Why me?" He turned to her. "Because you never pretended. You never tried to impress. You were just you, and that changed everything." Sarah's eyes softened. "I didn't come here for compliments. I didn't bring you here for politics," he replied. She looked down at her hands. "So, what did you bring me here for?" Ethan was quiet. Then, carefully, he reached for her hand. "To start again," he said, "with nothing between us but truth." She let his fingers rest on hers, unsure if it was too soon or exactly right. Then the glass door slid open behind them. "Ethan," Sophie said, stepping out, We have a situation. He dropped her hand, the shift immediate. What kind? Photos. From the dance. They've gone public. Investors are asking questions. Sarah froze. Ethan's jaw tightened. We'll handle it. Sophie looked between them. You should come back inside. And just like that, the bubble broke. Ethan turned to Sarah, his expression apologetic. Give me 10 minutes. She nodded. Go. He hesitated. Don't leave. I won't. But as she watched him disappear back into the party, into suits and murmurs and spotlights, Sarah felt a familiar twist in her chest. She had walked back into his world. And for the first time since their reconciliation, she wondered if it might push her out again. The photo spread faster than wildfire. By morning it was everywhere. Tech blogs, investor forums, even a lifestyle magazine that hadn't cared about Ethan Walker until he was seen dancing with a woman they couldn't identify. Walker's mystery guest sparked speculation at annual gala. Sarah woke up to 3 missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize and a flurry of messages from former co-workers. She didn't reply to any of them. Instead, she sat on the edge of her bed, phone in her lap, staring at a still image of her and Ethan, mid-dance, smiling at each other like no one else existed. The photo was beautiful, honest, and now weaponized. At Walker Tech, the board convened a private meeting within hours. Ethan stood at the head of the glass conference table, the skyline behind him sharp and grey. Sophie sat 2 seats down, expression unreadable. The room smelled of tension, hot coffee, pressed suits, and politics. We trusted your judgment, said one board member, arms folded. But this? He tapped his tablet where the photo was displayed. This compromises perception. I disagree, Ethan replied calmly. We're not a monarchy. We're a tech company. Transparency is part of our culture. Another board member spoke up. Transparency doesn't mean entanglement. The woman in that photo isn't an executive. She isn't part of our strategic team. She's your former assistant, and now she's being labeled as your romantic partner. She's not just anything, Ethan said, voice clipped. She's Sarah, and if anyone bothered to ask about her qualifications, they'd know. We're not questioning her intelligence, interrupted the chairman. We're questioning your ability to lead without emotional compromise. Sophie shifted in her chair but didn't speak. Ethan exhaled. So, what exactly are you asking me to do? There was a pause. Then the chairman spoke again. Step back from her publicly, quietly, until the noise fades. It's not a punishment, it's a precaution. And if I don't? A longer pause. We'll have to re-evaluate your leadership position, the chairman said. You've built something great, Ethan. Don't burn it down for a story that isn't worth the fallout. Ethan clenched his jaw. That night, Sarah received a message from Ethan. Can we talk? Now. They met outside her apartment, the city buzzing quietly around them. Ethan wore no coat, no tie, just a black sweater and jeans. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Sarah stepped outside, arms crossed against the chill. I assume this is about the photo? Yes, he said. And what came after? She waited. The board is panicking. Investors are questioning whether my leadership is compromised. Because you danced with someone who wasn't wearing a name tag? She said, bitter. Ethan didn't smile. They want me to distance myself, he said, at least for now, until this dies down. Her breath caught. And are you going to? He didn't answer immediately. I thought you said you didn't care what they thought. I said I'd protect what matters, he replied. And right now, you're what matters. If the attention gets worse, they'll come after you. The press will dig. They already are. So what? She said. Let them. Sarah, no, she interrupted, voice trembling. Don't say you're doing this to protect me, because what you're really doing is choosing silence again. Ethan stepped closer. That's not fair. You keep saying you see me, but every time things get complicated, you hide, behind policy, behind protocol, behind fear. I'm trying to hold together everything I've built. And what about what we've built? She asked, softer now. Silence. Then Ethan said the one thing that changed everything. I think you should step back just until things settle. Sarah felt the words like a slap. Wow, she whispered. I don't want this to destroy you, he added. You already have. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just turned, walked back inside and closed the door behind her. Quietly, completely. And Ethan stood there, alone, in the hallway, where moments before there had still been hope. Back at Walker Tech, Sarah's name was quietly removed from internal workflows. Her keycard deactivated again. Sophie never spoke of it, and no one asked why her desk remained empty a second time. But Ethan noticed. He noticed every morning when the coffee tasted wrong. He noticed when he drafted emails and almost typed her name out of habit. He noticed when he stood in the elevator and remembered the moment they almost kissed in silence. The office was louder now, but emptier. He had done what they asked. He had protected the company, but in the process he had lost something far more valuable. And even he didn't know if he could get it back. Paris was colder than Sarah expected. The wind curled around the Seine like a whispered secret, and the city, though familiar in photos, felt dreamlike beneath her boots. She hadn't planned to come. She hadn't even responded to Ethan's invitation at first. The email had arrived 2 weeks ago, short, simple, and filled with quiet meaning. We're launching the product in Paris. I'd like you to be there, not as staff, not as audience, but as someone who helped build this. If you say yes, I'll send the ticket. If you don't, I'll understand. She read it 3 times before closing her laptop and walking away. But something about it lingered. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a bribe. It was an open door. And after everything, Sarah had learned one thing. Doors don't stay open forever. So here she was, in Paris, standing backstage in a glass conference hall overlooking the Eiffel Tower. Her badge didn't say assistant, it said strategic advisor, a new title, a new chapter. The crowd buzzed beyond the curtains, tech leaders, investors, press, a sea of people she once thought she'd never stand in front of. But more than nerves, what filled her chest now was presence. Then, Ethan appeared. He wore a tailored black suit, no tie, hair slightly tousled like he'd run his hands through it one too many times. When he saw her, something in his face changed, softened. You came, he said quietly. I told myself I wouldn't, she replied. Then I realized I didn't want the story to end in silence. He nodded, his gaze steady. You deserve to be seen and heard. She smiled. So do you. The lights dimmed. A tech coordinator gave Ethan the signal. He turned to her. I want you up there with me, when I introduce the product. Sarah blinked. You sure? I've never been more sure of anything. They stepped onto the stage together, side by side. Ethan spoke first, introduced the technology, thanked the team, then paused. There's someone here today without whom this launch wouldn't have happened, he said, his voice carrying across the hall. She doesn't like the spotlight. But she's the reason this company rediscovered its soul. He turned toward her. Sarah Bennett, please stand with me. Applause followed, sincere, thunderous. Sarah stepped forward, her hands shaking slightly, but Ethan's hand reached out and steadied hers, just enough. When the conference ended, when the interviews were over and the lights faded, he found her again by the river under the tower's glow. They stood in silence for a long time. Then Ethan said, I almost lost you for good. But you didn't, she replied. I pushed you away, twice. And I came back, she said. Not because of your title, but because when I looked at you, I didn't see a CEO. I saw the man who stood still while I hid between his legs and didn't ask why. He laughed, a quiet, grateful sound. I want more than conferences and titles, he said. I want real mornings, fights about coffee, long walks with no purpose. I want you, in every version you are. Sarah's heart beat so loudly she could feel it in her fingertips. Then ask me, she whispered. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black box, not with a diamond, but a silver ring shaped like an infinity loop. No spotlight, he said, no headline, just me, asking if you'll build something with me. Something true. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Only if I get to be more than your assistant. You'll be everything, he replied. They kissed, finally, not rushed, not dramatic, but steady, real, Later that year, they were married on a quiet beach with no press, no board, no corporate speeches. Just them, friends, family, laughter, music. Sarah didn't wear a veil. Ethan didn't wear a tie. And no one asked who she used to be, only who she had become. They didn't start with promises. They started with silence, failures, and awkward attempts to protect themselves from the world. But in the end, it wasn't power, position, or the past that brought them together. It was the courage to be seen, to choose each other, even after they had both been lost. Because sometimes love doesn't enter through the right door. It runs in, scared, and hides between the legs of a stranger. If this story touched you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us, where are you listening from? Your support is what allows us to continue bringing stories like this.